So Stephen already went over this, who I am. So what we're going to talk about today is a form of acceptance criteria. It's called Gherkin. It's also known as, more commonly known as given, when, then. It's this template that we use. So we're going to go through here. What is Gherkin? What is given, when, then as far as acceptance criteria goes? And but we're going to spend most of the remaining 40 to 50 minutes doing some exercises and going through and collaborating and actually trying to write some of this template of acceptance criteria using given, when, then. So the format that we use in given, when, then, it's given some condition exists, when some trigger event happens to change that status quo, then some outcome is expected. And a little bit of history about this format. It's called Gherkin because it is a syntax that was used with, and is still, I guess, used with Cucumber, which is a software tool that supports behavior-driven development. I call it given, when, then, so that there's no mystery about it. None of the teams I've ever worked with have actually directly used Cucumber. So when I call it Gherkin, they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, given, when, then, given, when, then, given, when, then. Also, as a reminder, acceptance criteria, you're probably familiar with user stories where, as some type of user, I want to perform some action so that I obtain some value. That's a different talk. We're going to focus on the acceptance criteria today. So acceptance criteria is defined as the conditions that must be satisfied for a product, user story, or increment of work to be accepted. It's not part of the Scrum guide, but acceptance criteria can be a useful tool teams may choose to use to improve the quality of product backlog items. So acceptance criteria is not a definition of done. That is something else. Acceptance criteria deals specifically with that particular work item. It's not a complete requirement specification. I've dealt with some very persnickety developers who are like, well, it wasn't in the acceptance criteria, wasn't in the given, when, then piece that you wrote. I'm like, so this work item, it's more than just the user story. It's more than just the given, when, then statement. There's a lot more to it. Some organizations will use a formal, big, fat requirement specification document or system specification document. This is just really to help move that conversation along so that we can get the development team, the product owner, business analyst, project manager, the business line, whoever is helping to guide the development team, so that it removes a lot of the barriers of communication. So it kind of level sets those expectations better than it was without given, when, then acceptance criteria. But what I've found in my years as being a product owner is that the best part of given, when, then is as acceptance criteria is it forces me, if I use this template, it really forces me to think about the details of a potential solution. Like I have to think through, okay, so what has to be true for this to happen? If the development team is going to use this as a test case, and the last program I came off of, I was fortunate enough to have a dedicated automated test engineer, and he loved when I would use Gherkin to describe our user stories, because he would just build his automated tests in whatever system we were using at the time. He would just use the given, when, then acceptance criteria and add some additional stuff that happens on the back end. But it forces me to make sure that I understand what I'm asking the development team to build. So if you if you have a product owner or a business analyst who's really not doing a very good job of helping fill in the blanks before you start working, this tool may help you get them more on the same page and help accelerate the communication that you have with that representation of the business line. So the other thing I'll mention is, for some user stories, you might find yourself writing several of these given, when, then statements, depending on how big or wide or complicated the piece of development you're working on. And we'll go through some examples here in a minute. But first, let's start breaking down the components of given, when, then. So as you might expect, the first piece is the given. So whenever I'm writing given, when, then acceptance criteria, I'm thinking about, okay, so for the given statement, so what has to be true? What kind of preconditions has to be true before we get started? Usually there's something in some kind of a status, or the user's already performed some kind of action, like the customer has added items to her cart, or the student has already matriculated and has an account with the university before they start registering for classes. Now, one of the pieces of the pro tip that I always give with this is if you can, avoid defaulting to given the user is logged in. So what I've found is this is really a cop out. And whenever I see other product owners, and even myself when I first got started, is unless you're writing acceptance creators specifically about logging in, or that you're logged in versus not logged in, you're really not adding clarity. And it feels like a lot of times when I see other product owners do this, it feels like more like they're worried about following the template than to really think about what the problem and the solution states are for this. So try to avoid the user is logged in, unless it's really about whether or not the user is logged in right now. The next piece is the when statement. So what forces a change to that status quo? Like, what's the trigger event here that something changes? It could be that the user does some action, they click some button. It could be that the system receives some kind of a file or message. It could be that some amount of time has passed. There's a lot of different things that will cause a change to the system. And all we're doing here is identifying, well, what is that trigger? And like I'd mentioned before, the more you can make this about a specific user type performing an action, the clearer it's going to be for everyone else to find when they read your acceptance criteria. So try to avoid writing in passive voice. Like if you need a quick refresher, active voice is, or passive voice is, the quick brown fox was jumped over, or the lazy dog was jumped over by the quick brown fox. Generally speaking, if you can add by zombies at the end of your sentence, it's probably a passive voice sentence. So you want to make it active. Active is the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. You want to usually try to start with, okay, some user has performed some kind of an action. And if you can talk about that, the customer clicks checkout. The customer tries to withdraw less than or equal to X amount of dollars. If you can put it in those kind of terms, it becomes much clearer for everyone. And then the last main piece is the when statement. So if the user is entering some kind of data and the system is validating it, you might mention that in your when statement. But this is the outcome of what's happening here. You can specify validation rules in other sections and really get into business rules outside of the given when and just reference it. Rather than listing a long list of, well, here's all the fields that we need to include in the output from this little user story from this work item. So in this example here, I have that the customer started the checkout process. Given the customer started the checkout process, when the customer enters their address and the system successfully validates the address, see validation below, then the system will do whatever it needs to do. So here in the when statement, I'm kind of punting and saying, okay, so there are a long list of validation rules that we're going to work on, and those are located in another piece. I've also seen people use tables so that if this value is equal to this, then this is the output here, or this is the trigger. You can get pretty creative with this. Whatever works between you and your development team. It's coming up with that lingua franca. How are we going to use the acceptance criteria to spell things out? Last piece then is the then. What is different after the trigger? Does the system update objects? Does it change statuses? Does it create tasks? Does it send data downstream? So given the customer has added items to her cart, when the customer clicks checkout, then the system will display the items in the cart. The other example I have here is given the customer has X amount of funds in their account, when the customer tries to withdraw less than or equal to X dollars, then the system will dispense the funds. And this is a pattern that you can repeat. So a lot of times I'll throw and into the acceptance criteria as well for the then piece, because a lot of times it's more than just one thing happening. So I'll use the and if there's a lot of interplay in the then. So for example, given the customer has added items to her cart, When the customer clicks checkout, then the system will display the items in the cart, and the system will show the total for the cart. Given the customer has X amount of funds in their account, when the customer tries to withdraw less than or equal to X amount of dollars, then the system will dispense the funds, and the system will ask the customer if the customer wants to make another transaction. So you can string a lot of these together, because you know that when you're building some of this functionality, it's not just one thing that happens, it's actually several things. And knowing that I can write and here as a product owner really forces me to think about that and say, oh yeah, I got to remind the dev team, you need to print the receipt. Oh yeah, you need to update the logs. Oh yeah, you need to forward the message on to this other system that's doing work as well. And you can do that with and statements. I also like to use and statements to kind of iterate through different use cases. So this is a conversation between the development team and the product owner or whoever's in charge of defining the stories like this. Your team may find it easy to bundle like the standard use case and maybe an alternate or exception use case in the same story. So given the customer has added items to her cart, when the customer clicks checkout, and all the customer's items are in stock, then some stuff happens. Alternatively, if the item is out of stock, you can just do a cut and paste job. Given the customer has added items to her cart, when the customer clicks checkout and one or more items is out of stock, then something else is going to happen. And I like to just cut and paste between these given when then statements and highlight, okay, so what is the difference here? So in one case, the customer's items are out of stock. In another, the items are in stock. I wish I would have known this back in my Joann Fabrics days, because one of the big complicated things that we kept running into over and over again was we had a whole different process for what happens if a customer is shipping from Joann.com to a Canadian address. There's a whole different set of rules to follow. And if we had been using given when then for to write user stories with back in those days, it would have made it a lot easier for me just to copy the standard primary use case, which was, well, the customer's checking out, they have a US address, and then things happen. But I would then create another copy of that story for the Canadian customers who had different rules, where maybe we had to convert to US dollars. Maybe we had to validate and send it to certain, I think we could ship to every province except for one. I want to say that we were forbidden to ship to Quebec due to some language compliance issues that we just couldn't incorporate. So again, use these as the and statements to help highlight between the standard use case, your primary use case where it's the happy path, alternate use cases where maybe it's a Canadian address, maybe there's something else going on, and the exception use cases where it's rejected for one reason or another, because the customer does not have the money in her account when she tries to withdraw it, because the item, one or more items, is out of stock. And you can help the development team understand, okay, here's the different cases we need to run through. You may find it helpful to combine these all into one user story. You may find it more helpful to split these into separate user stories for each case. It's a conversation starter with the team as far as what works best. So that was a lot of stuff here in 15 minutes. I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions, because the next step we're going to go through is we're going to actually go through and write some as a team, some given when then, using some user stories that I wrote around a fake parking app, so you can find street parking. Any questions?
Matt, maybe you could just reiterate again where you think is the relationship between the user story itself and the given when then structure. Would this be typically like part of elaboration of the story, or like how do you picture the relationship?
Actually, great question. So what's the relationship between the acceptance criteria and the user story, or whatever the case may be? So again, it's a conversation with your team to find what works best with your team. The last team I was on, we found that when I would write the user story for that particular work item as a product owner, I would at the same time write the acceptance criteria, and then we'd go through as a group during refinement and say, okay, this makes sense to me, or they'd say, you know, Matt, this doesn't make any sense. I think this is number one, it's going to be too big. We need to split. In this case, you're talking about the items are in stock and the items are out of stock. That's a lot of work. I think we should split the out of stock use case into a separate story. So writing these use cases, these acceptance criteria when you're writing the user story is extremely helpful. But even if you wait until after the team has started on it, it's better late than never, right? The other thing that I'll also recommend is I have found that acceptance criteria using given when then also works at the feature level. So at the user story level, that might be, oh, I don't know, the customer wants to withdraw money, so you dispense cash. It might be that that we need to create the checkout. It might be I need to check out using Apple Pay. It's usually an amount of work that can be performed in, I don't know, a few days to maybe a couple of weeks. I also use them at the feature level, which might be a Canadian checkout, where there's a whole bunch of user stories that we can decompose it down into. And at that level, that higher level of abstraction, sometimes I'll use given when then use cases just to kind of outline the basic broader thought behind what we're trying to build, what we're trying to solve for the customer in this group of user stories at the feature level. What I found that it doesn't always work so good with is if you have just a technical task where it's something like, hey, I need to stand up the DynamoDB for the customer address database, or I need to install new certs for security reasons. For those technical tasks, given when then acceptance criteria isn't really going to help you very much. Given when then is great if you imagine the software that you're building as a black box, at least to the product owner or the business line, where they know, okay, stuff goes in. I've got business rules that covers what happens, but I don't know the mechanics of it all. And then something comes out of this black box. That's the ideal opportunity to use given when then.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions while I switch over here? All right. Stephen, we want to go till what we say about quarter till?
Quarter till or 10 to the top of the hour.
Okay.
We'll leave a little time for questions at the end.
Okay. So this will be interactive. I'll also say that included with the slide deck, there's a handout, like a job aid that you can print out and keep next to you, or bring up anytime you're trying to use a memory jogger. It's just a little one pager so that you can write your given when then acceptance criteria. All right. So let's try this in practice. You can shout it out or you can paste it into the chat, whatever you're more comfortable with. I wrote a bunch of user stories here for a fake parking app. So you pull into Pittsburgh, you open up your app, you want to pay for parking. The way it works is you have to create an account where you enter in your car information. You have to select at least one one type of payment, whether it's Google Pay, Apple Pay, PayPal, whatever the case may be. Your car information, and then when you actually go to park, you enter in a zone number. There's signs on the street that indicate this is the zone that you're parking in, so you have to enter that so that the parking enforcement agent knows that, oh, you're parking in zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and if the parking agent finds your car in 4, 5, 6, 7, well, you're getting a ticket because that's not the zone that you paid for. So far, so good. Hopefully everyone's kind of familiar with this idea. All right, so first one that we want to start with here is, as a customer, I want to prepay a parking session with PayPal so I don't get a ticket. What would we write for if we wanted to write given when then acceptance criteria for this? Let's start with the given. What's the precondition here? What are we starting off with? If you were the test engineer, what would you put in as kind of the thing to start the test up with? So Steve says, given I have set up an account with complete information. Okay, let's start with that. And I try to, unlike user stories, I try to put it in third person so that we know who we're talking about, so we can easily switch between, the customer, the parking enforcement agent, the admin back at the office, or even another system. So let's start with the customer has created an account with all the necessary data. What's the trigger here? What are they doing here? They want to prepay a parking session with PayPal. When the customer arrives at a parking location. So in this case, I disagree with you there, Stephen. I think that in this case, the customer is taking an action. They're not just showing up. Like, they have to do something with their phone to initiate this. They're probably going to hit park, right? They're probably going to hit a button on their phone that initiates that parking session. So maybe it's something like the customer selects PayPal for payment, or there we go. Now we've got some good stuff going in here. The QR code, that's a good idea. I didn't even include QR code in any of my use cases. They're just typing in the zone number. So let's start with this. The customer clicks park in the app. That's a good one, Brian. And the parking spot is open for the season. For what it's worth, this is replacing the old-fashioned meters where you feed it with nickels, dimes, and quarters. So you're just parking for like an hour. So you pull up, park your car. It has the little number of the zone, and you put, okay, I'm going to park for 2 hours. I'm actually probably going to use this tomorrow when I'm in Pittsburgh and working from the library. I'll put in, okay, I'm in zone 4777, and I'm going to park for 4 hours, and then I'm going to go meet a friend for lunch. We actually have a user story later on here that'll talk about extending your time. Okay, so let's work through some of these. I think you've got a good idea there. And the customer allowed to park in the zone. Keep them coming, keep them coming. What's the outcome here? What's the then? If you were going to test this, if you're setting up an automated test for this, okay, so we have a customer account that we're going to use, and we're going to have the automated test, click park, probably select PayPal. What comes out? Then the app should confirm the parking details and the customer selects PayPal as the payment method. Okay. This is great conversations. I wish the conversations I had with my last development team were this productive and this collaborative. Then the parkman informant will have a record of the reservation. I think, Brett, I think you've got an excellent Very important. Probably the key there is they don't want to get a parking ticket. We need to make sure that parking enforcement knows that this is a valid parking session, and they get a coupon for DoorDash. So Bob, we'll assume that the customer, when they set up their account, that they've entered in their name, their make and model, their license plate, and as part of the checkout process, as part of the parking process, they're going to enter in the zone. And it'll check to make sure that they're allowed to park in the zone. But yeah, I think it's going to be that something along the lines of the app will use PayPal to charge the customer. Oops. Oh, come on. My touch typing is failing me. What was the one that someone had there? Was and the system will mark the car zone combination as valid for parking enforcement. And we could add more and more to this. By this point in time, you've probably worked with your development team, if you're the product owner, enough to have a good idea of, okay, here's what we've got so far. Here's the level of detail that you want to see as a development team in our given when then acceptance criteria. And you'll be able to go from that. But this is actually pretty close to what I would, if I was going to write acceptance criteria for this, it would be something along these lines. The app displays the confirmation that, oh yeah, that's a very good one. Let's add that. User feedback, or feedback to the user. That the session is valid. That's a great one. All right, let's jump on to another one here. How about this next one? This is the one we probably should have started with, actually. As a customer, I want to create an account so I don't have to keep entering my car and payment information. So what's the given here? This one's a tough one. We're starting from scratch. The customer wants to create their account for the first time. You can't even cop out and say, well, the customer's logged in. I think, Amy, I think you're on the right track. As a customer, I am using the parking app or website. Brian says, given I am on the checkout page after entering my information. And Steve says, given the customer has downloaded the app. I like Steven's one the best. So given the customer has installed the app, we'll say that this is a smartphone based product that we're building here. Because you're on the street and you need to enter in that zone when you park your car. So the customer's installed the app, okay? They want to create an account. So what happens next? What's the trigger here? The app is open and the first time it's been open, yeah, that's a good one. So I think, yeah, I think Brian and Amy, I think you both have equally valid ones that create an account or opening the app for the first time. What is the then? Like what happens when the customer opens that app for the first time and they start the create account process, whether it's clicking the create account button or actually, let's go with create account. We'll say this is a minimally viable product. Clicks. And then the next version of this will add the will have it pop open immediately to creating an account if it doesn't recognize them. Then the system prompts the user to complete all the inputs required to create an account. Yeah, I love it. Let's see here. Then the app will prompt. Yes, Stephen, I think that's an excellent point there. The app will prompt the customer to enter see table below. That's another good one there, Jason. Given the customer does not already have an account, that might be better than maybe it's an and. Then the app will load the new customer information, billing, car information from the submission. Then I enter the required information, name, email, payment, etc. I enter and save. I confirm my account registration. Then my account will be successfully stored in the system. So this is one of the, so whether this is the last step, it prompts the customer to enter all this information, which we have in a table below with first name, last name, payment information, car, make, model, license plate. I'm trying to think what else happens in real life on the real app. But so the question then between the product owner and the development team is, at this point, like, should we end the story here, or do we want to include the validation that happens that when a person enters in the credit card information to store it in the app, is that when we validate this, or is that a separate story? When the customer enters in their make, model, and vehicle, is that when we store it to the centralized database, or is that a separate story? So what do you guys think? If you're the development team, is that the end of the story? Or if you were going to build this functionality of account creation, does it include storing the data? Does it include data validation at this point in time? Oh, that sucks, Bob. Bob suggests having the user confirm the license plate number. All right, Brian says include it, but in a different story for the creation of the database. All right, so I'm going to add a note here because it could be a week. One of the things that I kept finding over and over and over again with my last team was we do refinement of a story in early January. The sprint where we were doing the refinement might end at the end of January, and then somebody picks up this story in the middle of February. It's been 4 to 6 weeks since we last looked at the story, so nobody remembers the details, and that's why I think it's great to capture this stuff here. It's also good to call out, like, okay, this piece is a separate story. This is out of scope. So separate stories will handle data validation and storing customer info to the database. So this is just about giving the customer the opportunity to enter the information. Thank you. All right. Oh, wow, burning daylight here. Let's jump on to some parking enforcement stories. So that was for our customer's point of view, but we also have the parking enforcement officer who's out on the street writing out tickets like their job depends on it. So the basic use case here is with this is they'll come to a zone. The parking enforcement officer will enter the zone number that he or she is in. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to check cars now in zone 4777, and then they'll enter in license plates to check and say, is this a valid license plate? Is this a valid license plate? Is this a valid license plate? Someday in the future, once we get 1.0 off the ground, we'll give them an optical reader where they can just scan the license plate for each car. So ideally, happy path It comes up and says, hey, this is a valid parking situation. Worst case scenario, it says, hey, there's no parking session for this vehicle. And because we only know what the customer entered, all we know is that this license plate is invalid. It gets complicated because now all we know is that this car with this license plate does not have a valid parking session. If they're visiting from out of town and they said, you know what, I don't have time for this. Pittsburgh owes me some free parking. We don't know anything about them. All we know is the license plate, and all we can do is write them a ticket. So let's start with the simplest use case here. I think Jason adds, I think it's important to make sure that the then clause is always testable. Absolutely agree with you there. And so will my automated test engineer for my last team. So let's start off here. As a parking enforcement officer, I want to validate that a car has a valid parking session so that I don't write a ticket for a valid customer. So this is Happy Path. We'll have a separate one for actually writing a ticket. So what's the given here? What's the precondition? Given I'm a parking enforcement officer with an application to check parking for a car that is parked in a location that requires a parking session. So I think we can go one better than that, Amy. I think that in this case, it's not so much that I'm a parking enforcement agent. If we were writing a test case for this, we'd probably start with the customer. We'd probably say, okay, hey, this license and zone, right now it's valid. At this moment in time, this is a valid parking session, right? Do you guys agree? Or would you do it something more granular than that?
Would that not be part of the when? Like,
oh, that's a
one
good question.
One case, it's when it's a valid parking session. Another situation is when it's an invalid parking session.
That is a great question, but I think the when is a trigger. It's an action that a person is taking. In this case, I think it's when the parking enforcement agent. I think the when here is based on the parking enforcement agent checking the license plate.
I see. So it's part of the given. It's
I
either
think
valid or
so,
not. Yeah, yeah.
but there's, this is a cat and there's a million ways to skin this thing. Let's try writing it both ways. We'll see which one makes the most sense. Let's start with the when the car has a valid parking session. If that's what we're in, then we'll do a separate one where it will do the given the car has a valid parking session.
Yeah, I'm gonna retract my suggestion. I think it is part of the given.
It's no problem at all. For what it's worth, when I'm writing these, if I don't know where to start, if it's something like I don't know how we're going to test this, a lot of times I'll actually start with the when, or I'll start with the then. Okay, I know what the end state is supposed to be. I know what comes out of this black box, but a lot of times it's easiest to start with the what's the trigger. Then you can, or you start with the then you go back to the when, and you're like, okay, I know what the given is, and then you start realizing, oh, I got to add another and statement to the when, and I forgot to add the whole logging and audit piece to the then, and then notifications and all of that stuff, and it becomes kind of a spiral, and then you just realize, then you have to just decide, okay, when am I spending too much time on writing the acceptance criteria? When have I added too much detail here? So let's see here. Let's go back and look at the chat. So for each car the agent encounters, they need to check for a valid session. That is correct. And Jason says, when given a car is parked in the spot and has a valid session, when I enter the car's license plate number, then the system will show me a green check. Okay. Given a photo of the license plate of the car parked in this zone. Bob will save the OCR scans for an enhancement next year. Right now, we're going to do it like cavemen and just have them type in the license plate. All right, so let's start with this. We'll start with the when the car has a valid parking session, and somebody said it. I think that we said that was going to be the given, right? Oops. Given the car has a valid parking session, when what is it? The parking enforcement officer, the license plate, then the system will indicate that it's a valid parking session. I'll let the UX people decide, well, how's it going to show that? So far, so good. And I'll add a note here to remind us a separate story. We'll cover invalid parking situations. Okay, I think we did pretty good with that one. Let's say I want to park a ticket. So again, somebody the enforcement officer goes, they enter in the license plate, they check it, and it comes out and says this is not a valid parking session. And then we would expect that parking enforcement officer will then print the ticket. They have a hip printer right on their hip that's connected via Bluetooth to their device, and it just prints a ticket right then and there, and they put it under the wiper blade and move on. So I think it's kind of similar. At least starts off similar to this, only instead of valid session, it's does not have. So given the car does not have a valid parking session, when the parking enforcement officer enters the license plate, then what happens? Do we automatically print the ticket? Do we ask the officer if they want to print the ticket? What should we do next? Then the system shows the parking enforcement officer a red X and displays the prompt for confirmation to print the ticket. Okay, let's go with that. Again, I'll leave the red X up to the UX members of the team, but for now, we just know that we need to, the system. The officer wants to print a ticket so that the then should be a ticket is printed. I agree, Jason. So, so it'll indicate that the parking, it's an invalid parking session. Maybe then we throw up a prompt that says, the officer informed that if a ticket has been issued to the offending vehicle, system informs the officer that there are no valid reservations for the vehicle and a ticket is printed to be issued. In this case, we want to leave it in the officer's hands. Issue a ticket or not. So maybe what we just found is this is actually two separate stories. maybe it's a little bit more complex than this. Or maybe as a development team, you're like, no, no, Matt, I think it's just 2 steps. It's check, it's an invalid session, and then there's a separate set of criteria um, that there's a separate story to print the ticket separately. So maybe it starts off, given the car does not have a valid parking session, when the customer selects print a ticket, and then we'll go through those steps. Does that sound good? I think we're about out of time, but I have, like I said, I went through this exercise myself last night and came up with my versions of these to inspire you when you go back to work tomorrow to write your own given when then acceptance criteria. So we'll include this, the job aid, which it's not going to let me click on for some reason. There we go. And the slide deck, we'll make sure that they're distributed out to those. So I'll hand it back to Stephen.
I think we do have, so aside from the specific examples that have been really helpful to walk through, I'm just wondering if anyone in any of the attendees have any other questions for Matt about how or when to best use the given, when, then structure.
Does anybody have any experience using these or using Gherkin, the original where this originally came from?
Maybe one question, Matt, is do you think there are specific kinds of work that it's appropriate to use this and other kinds of work that's less appropriate?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, like I say, it's if you're describing if your work item here is a black box of some kind where there's data comes in, data goes out, or like there's a precondition, there's business rules that govern what happens when a trigger event occurs, and then there's an after effect to it. Those are the ideal things where you'll use given when then. I've seen some other business analysts and product owners just try to use this for everything, and like the dev team will have like it's a development task, like stand up a database, install the certs, stand up the server, those kind of things where it's really cut and dry and it's not something that you're going to write an automated test for. You're wasting your time with acceptance criteria, and then you'll just get kind of soured on the whole process and stop using them altogether. So use it where it makes sense. These conversations about, well, what's the given and what's the when, like we just had, I have had those exact same conversations many times with my development team, and it really helps everyone focus and get on the same page. Just like with user stories, it's not about the user story, it's about the conversation that the user story, or in this case, the acceptance criteria drives. And we get to a much better place where we're all more on the same page. And you can combine those with like logical models, UML diagrams, those kind of things as necessary to bring everybody even closer. This is just one more model.